Viewer discretion is essential. This story is among the darkest in modern criminal history. Imagine an ordinary apartment in Milwaukee in 1991, a small, cluttered kitchen. The hum of an old fridge, faded carpet. Police step inside and within minutes they're backing out in shock. A foul chemical stench. Bleach. Rot. In a bedroom drawer, Polaroids, bodies in grotesque poses. In the fridge, a human head. In the freezer, wrapped packages labeled like leftovers, but filled with dismembered remains. On the walls, a shrine in progress. The man behind it all looks disturbingly unremarkable, quiet, pale, polite. His name is Jeffrey Dahmer. For years, he murdered young men, defiled their bodies, and sometimes consumed them, while living among neighbors who barely suspected a thing. In this video, we're going inside the disturbing mind of the Milwaukee Cannibal, not to glorify him, but to understand how a seemingly ordinary person became a symbol of unimaginable horror. Before we unpack Jeffrey Dahmer's psyche, we need to set some boundaries. This video will discuss murder, sexual violence, necrophilia, and cannibalism. We will avoid graphic sensationalism and focus on psychology, patterns, and systemic failures while respectfully acknowledging the victims. Jeffrey Lionel Dahmer killed at least 17 young men and boys between 1978 and 1991. His crimes combined sexual sadism, necrophilia, and cannibalism, earning him the name the Milwaukee Cannibal. Yet people who met him often described him as shy, awkward, even polite. How did a boy from a seemingly average Midwestern family become one of history's most infamous serial killers? Was he born a monster, shaped by trauma, or some terrifying mix of circumstance and inner compulsion? We'll move chronologically from childhood to his final arrest while pausing at key psychological turning points. Along the way, we'll examine what experts believe drove him and what society missed again and again. Jeffrey Dahmer was born in 1960 in West Allis, Wisconsin, to Lionel and Joyce Dahmer. From the outside, it looked like a standard Midwestern family. Suburban houses, lawns, school, church. Inside, things were far more unstable. His mother struggled with mental health issues, anxiety, and substance dependence. His parents fought loudly and often. Several accounts describe Jeffrey as a quiet, withdrawn child, overshadowed by chaos and emotional neglect. He was medically treated at a young age for a double hernia, an invasive surgery that some speculate may have contributed to early body-focused anxieties. But what stands out most from his childhood is an eerie fascination with dead animals. Jeffrey collected roadkill, dismembered animals, and stored their bones in jars. He claimed he was simply curious about how things fit together, yet this fixation wasn't monitored or meaningfully questioned by adults. Here, the first ingredients appear: isolation, emotional instability at home, and a growing fascination with death and control. By adolescence, Dahmer's inner world was darkening. He was socially awkward, bullied, and increasingly isolated. He began drinking heavily in high school, showing up to class intoxicated, hiding alcohol in his locker, and even in a taped-up cup. At the same time, he was discovering his sexuality. Dahmer realized he was attracted to men, but in a conservative time and environment, he felt unable to express it openly. His sexual fantasies gradually fused with violent imagery. He later described imagining male joggers as unconscious bodies he could possess completely. He experimented with fantasies of total control, partners who wouldn't resist, leave, or reject him. Death, and later the idea of a zombie lover, became central to his arousal. Instead of getting help, Dahmer's odd behavior was often treated as a joke. Classmates recalled his Dahmer stunts, where he would fake seizures or cerebral palsy for laughs. Behind this mask, his compulsions were quietly evolving into something lethal. Dahmer committed his first known murder at 18. In June 1978, shortly after his parents' separation left him alone in the family home, he picked up a hitchhiker, 19-year-old Stephen Hicks. They drank, listened to music, and when Hicks wanted to leave, Dahmer panicked at the thought of abandonment. He struck Hicks from behind with a dumbbell, then strangled him. Afterwards, he dismembered the body in the basement, crushed the bones with a sledgehammer, and scattered them in the woods behind the house. Psychologically, this moment is critical. The fantasy of absolute control became reality. He discovered that killing removed the fear of rejection, his deepest anxiety. Yet he didn't kill again for nearly 9 years. During this gap, Dahmer attempted to appear functional. Brief college, a short stint in the army, various jobs. But the memory of that first murder never left him. It became a template he'd return to when loneliness and obsession finally overwhelmed him. The years after his first murder were marked by instability and escalating deviance. Dahmer, washed out of college due to drinking, was discharged from the army and drifted between relatives' homes and menial jobs. Inside, his fantasies were intensifying. He began frequenting bathhouses and gay bars, drugging men to render them unconscious, not yet killing them, but treating them as inanimate bodies. Staff eventually banned him after multiple complaints of men waking up disoriented and violated. He experimented with stealing a mannequin from a store and sleeping beside it. The key theme? He wanted a completely passive partner, a body he owned. At the same time, he was arrested for indecent exposure and later for fondling a 13-year-old boy. Courts gave him light sentences and probation. These were red sirens. Yet the system responded with leniency, viewing him as a troubled but manageable offender, not as someone on the brink of escalating into serial murder. In 1987, the killing resumed, and this time it wouldn't stop until his arrest. Dahmer met 25-year-old Stephen Tuomi at a bar, took a hotel room, and drank heavily. He later claimed he awoke to find Tuomi dead beside him, with no memory of the killing. Whether that's true or not, the pattern was set. He bought a large suitcase, transported the body to his grandmother's basement, and dismembered it. From 1987 onward, murders became more frequent. James Dockstader, Richard Guerrero, and others. When he eventually moved into his own apartment, Unit 213 at the Oxford Apartments, the privacy allowed his fantasy world to fully unfold. The psychological shift is profound. Killing was no longer a singular, horrifying event. It became ritualized, integrated into his daily life. He learned practical methods of disposal, honed his manipulation skills, and began experimenting with preserving body parts as trophies, physical anchors for his obsession with permanent possession. Inside Apartment 213, Dahmer created a private universe of control, delusion, and horror. The layout was modest, small living room, bedroom, kitchenette. But every corner served a function in his rituals. He lured victims, mostly young men of color, by offering money for photos. Once inside, he'd give them spiked drinks, wait for unconsciousness, then strangle them. He photographed their bodies in staged poses, dismembered them in the bathroom or kitchen, and stored remains in the fridge, freezer, and a blue barrel filled with acid. He arranged skulls and bones as proto-shrines, planning an altar with candles and a black table where he could feel at home. Cannibalism, he claimed, made his victims a part of him forever. Psychologically, the apartment was an externalization of his mind, compartmentalized, secretive, obsessed with ownership of bodies. Neighbors complained about the smell. Dahmer deflected with excuses about spoiled meat and exotic fish. The facade held, even as the horror escalated. To understand Dahmer's mind, we must examine his motives. He wasn't primarily driven by rage or thrill-seeking in the way some serial killers are. Instead, he was obsessed with preventing abandonment. He wanted partners who could never leave him. That led to necrophilia, sexual activity with the dead, where resistance is impossible. He escalated to experiments with drilling holes in victims' skulls and injecting acid or boiling water, attempting to create living zombies under his absolute control. He described wanting a completely compliant body, someone who would stay, silently, forever. Cannibalism fit the same logic. By consuming parts of his victims, he felt they were literally, physically becoming part of him. Clinicians debate labels like psychopathy, necrophilic disorder, and paraphilic disorders. What's clear is that Dahmer's sexual drive fused with a pathological need for control, producing a feedback loop where violence, death, and pleasure became inseparable in his mind. Despite the horrific consistency of his methods, Dahmer sometimes expressed remorse and self-loathing, though only after being caught. He drank heavily before and after killings, claiming alcohol quieted his conscience and made his fantasies possible. He told investigators he didn't kill because he enjoyed the act of murder itself, but because it was the only way to achieve the total, unchallenged companionship he craved. Yet he also acknowledged he could have stopped seeking victims, moved, or sought help, but didn't. His remorse, therefore, exists alongside sustained, calculated predation. This conflict is central to understanding him. He wasn't an emotionless movie villain. He was a profoundly disordered person who still understood right from wrong and chose, repeatedly, to pursue his compulsions at catastrophic human cost. His internal narrative, lonely, misunderstood, tormented, should never overshadow the objective reality. 17 young lives stolen and families permanently devastated. One of the most disturbing aspects of the Dahmer case is how many chances existed to stop him earlier, and were missed. In 1991, 14-year-old Konorak Synthesomphone escaped Dahmer's apartment, naked and bleeding. Neighbors called police. Officers arrived to find Dahmer strangely calm, claiming Konorak was his 19-year-old boyfriend who'd had too much to drink. Despite neighbors insisting the boy was a minor and in danger, police accepted Dahmer's explanation and returned Konorak to the apartment. Minutes later, Dahmer killed him. Systemic failures ran deep. Racism, homophobia, and dismissive attitudes toward queer relationships and immigrant families. Many of Dahmer's victims were Black, Asian, or Latino men whose disappearances weren't prioritized. Psychologically, these failures reinforced Dahmer's sense of invincibility. Each time authorities brushed past the truth, it confirmed his belief that he could continue. Understanding his mind requires also understanding the social blind spots that allowed him to operate for so long. Dahmer's downfall came on July 22, 1991. He invited Tracy Edwards, 32, to his apartment with the usual promises of money and photos. Inside, Edwards quickly sensed danger. He noticed the smell, the strange blue barrel, the handcuffs. Dahmer briefly managed to cuff one of Edwards' wrists and brandished a knife, but Edwards stayed remarkably calm, talking to Dahmer, waiting for an opening. Eventually he struck, escaped the apartment, and flagged down police. When officers entered Unit 213, they discovered the Polaroids, the remains, the altar in progress. Dahmer reportedly murmured, "For what I did, I should be dead." This moment shattered the private world he had built. Forensic evidence mapped out years of murders. The photographs provided chilling proof of methodical staging. Psychologically, this was the collision between fantasy and accountability. His carefully compartmentalized life, nice neighbor, quiet tenant, helpful store clerk, collapsed overnight, replaced by the monstrous reality he'd hidden for more than a decade. During his 1992 trial, Dahmer pleaded guilty but insane to 15 counts of murder in Wisconsin. The central legal question: was he so mentally ill that he couldn't understand his actions were wrong, or was he a calculating killer who chose evil? Psychiatrists on both sides testified. The defense highlighted his necrophilia, cannibalism, and obsessive fantasies as signs of profound mental disorder. The prosecution emphasized his planning: buying tools, luring victims, concealing evidence, lying to police. The jury ultimately found him legally sane and responsible, sentencing him to 15 consecutive life terms, over 900 years. In court, he expressed remorse and even claimed religious conversion later in prison. In 1994, fellow inmate Christopher Scarver killed Dahmer in a prison bathroom. Some saw his death as rough justice. Others argued that it denied families the full measure of accountability. The trial remains a case study in how the law navigates the intersection of extreme mental abnormality and moral responsibility. What can we learn from the disturbing mind of Jeffrey Dahmer, beyond morbid curiosity? First, extreme evil often wears an ordinary face. Neighbors described him as quiet, even helpful. Understanding this helps us resist simplistic stereotypes of obvious monsters. Second, early warning signs matter. Persistent cruelty to animals, severe social isolation, escalating sexualized fantasies of control. None of these guarantee future violence, but together they demand intervention. Third, systems failed. Racism, homophobia, and negligence allowed a predator to operate in plain sight. Listening to marginalized communities, taking missing persons seriously, and improving police training aren't abstract ideals. They're safeguards against future Dahmers. Finally, true crime storytelling carries ethical responsibility. The focus should remain on victims and lessons learned, not on turning killers into anti-heroes. Dahmer's mind was a convergence of pathology, fantasy, and opportunity. Recognizing those ingredients is uncomfortable but necessary if we want to prevent similar horrors. If you've watched this far, you're clearly interested in more than shock value. You want to understand how and why cases like Jeffrey Dahmer's happen. On this channel, we explore true crime with a focus on psychology, systems, and ethics, not sensationalism. We examine childhood environments, mental health, policing, and societal blind spots, always with respect for victims and survivors. If that approach resonates with you, consider subscribing and turning on notifications so you don't miss upcoming deep dives into other cases and broader topics in criminal psychology. I'd also like to hear from you. What aspects of the Dahmer case do you think get ignored in mainstream coverage? The victims' stories? The policing failures? The mental health questions? Share your thoughts in the comments, respectfully, and suggest cases you'd like analyzed next. And if this topic felt heavy, take a moment after this video to step away, breathe, and do something grounding. Consuming darkness should never consume you.